right. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Jake Sachs-Michelini. I'm a PhD candidate in composition at the CUNY Graduate Center and the organizer of this series. If you haven't been with us before, Algorithmic Sound is a series of virtual master classes with musicians and sound artists who work with generative systems and creative coding. This is our last masterclass for 2021. We're hoping to continue next year, so keep an eye out for announcements. This series is made possible by Art Science Connect, which is an initiative at the CUNY Graduate Center supporting interdisciplinary programs related to art, science, and technology. Art Science Connect is supported by the James Family Charitable Foundation and the L. Held Foundation. I'd like to thank Peter Eckersall and Amir Farjun for helping me put this series together. Today, we're excited to feature Matthew Ryals, a musician, sound designer, and educator who composes generative music with modular synthesizers. Matthew recently released an album called Voltage Scores on Oxtail Recordings. I really love the album, and I've been especially inspired by the composition process. Every single track on the album was recorded in a single live take without any overdubs. And the track list even includes the take numbers, so you know how many attempts it took before settling on the final versions. So when I'm listening to the album through this lens, I find it really exciting to kind of guess how Matthew and the synthesizer and the generative system made all of the decisions in collaboration. So Matthew, thanks for joining us. Throughout the masterclass today, please feel free to submit questions you have in the Q&A text box. And then I'll read them out when we get to them. We'd also like to invite anyone to join the meeting with video and audio to ask your questions and to have a more open conversation. So if you would like to do this, we'd really love it. And you can ask to join by using the raise your hand button in Zoom. So if we see any raised hands, we'll try our best to add you into the meeting so we can have a conversation. So yeah, without any further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Matthews. Hi, Matthew. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jake. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey. What should we do? How should we get started?
Well, I have a patch ready to go. And so I was going to do a little performance and then we can chat.
Perfect.
But yeah, do you have any questions before I do that?
Maybe a quick overview of what the setup that you're using for your performance, just so we know kind of like what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I have I'll switch my camera over so you can see it.
Sounds good.
So I have this modular synth setup, and this is basically my entire modular system. And today I'm doing a piece that I've been preparing for this class, and it uses various generative processes, and it also is fairly improvisatory, and it has some different sections that I've sort of prepared that I go into and improvise within, and yeah, that's the overview.
Fantastic. So every sound we're hearing is coming from the synth. There's no Ableton or anything else happening.
Oh, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, go for it. I'm going to turn myself off and looking forward to hearing this.
Awesome. I'm switching over my sound right now.
Sure. You want to do a quick sound check?
Yes. Whoa. All right. So just give me the thumbs up if you can hear this and I'll keep going.
Yay. Wow. Matthew, that was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I accidentally whacked my microphone pretty hard in the middle of it.
I think it was fine.
All right, cool.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Wow, so cool. So yeah, tell us about it. Tell us. It'd be awesome to just kind of have an overview of what just happened.
Okay, cool. I'll switch my camera back. Let's see here. Okay. So I'm very interested in micro and macro generative processes. And because I work with the modular synth, I mean, this format really lends itself to generative processes in general. And I find myself using them for to create melodies, to create rhythms all the time, and various different kinds. And so much of that is going on here. And even the tempo itself is constantly in flux. And so all the basic stuff that creates, what we generally consider music, all the general elements of music, such as timbre, melody, rhythm, all these different aspects are, being generated in some manner. And even if there's not a generative process involved, it's still a very unpredictable process to get those results. Or it's a process to get unpredictable results, I mean. And then on the flip side of that, I'm also like performing. So I'm trying to, I can push this piece in really further directions, but I didn't want to, risk it going off the rails too much. But I can really be quite improvisatory with it, and that's really fun as well. And then on the macro side of like going back to generative processes for a second, on the macro side of things, with this particular piece, I don't have a lot going on there because, well, when I'm performing, it's kind of important for me to be able to choose where I go. But not always. I actually am really interested in getting the macro processes more involved in live performance, where the synth is sort of like, I'm going to go to this section now, or I'm going to decide at this moment to go to a section, and I have to react in real time. I'm like, whoa, that's what it's doing now? Okay, I got to play with that. But there's not that happening here. The most macro thing is you might see this number when I was performing. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a number here. And while I was playing, there's something that's making it constantly be in flux. And that is actually the time it takes to go to a new section when I decide it. So one thing that's kind of cool is it really will slow down the transition to a section. And I can go more into detail how that works, but that's one big macro generative component. To a certain degree, it's not choosing, but it is deciding how long it's going to take to go somewhere, which is kind of cool. Like I'm like, go now, and it's like, okay, but I'm going to take a minute. You
Awesome.
know.
I'm really curious to know more about that. One of the big questions I wanted to ask you is how a piece like this is structured, how much of the structure is pre-planned, and who's deciding, when you sort of move from one kind of like very distinct section to another. So is that module kind of the brains of that kind of thinking?
Yeah, people who are into modular synths might know um, more analog versions of this module, such because this is a digital module. Um, a good example of an analog version is like make noise pressure points. What you
Mm-hmm.
see is what you get, or the make noise O control or zero control. Basically, what this module does, like those, is it stores a bunch of static voltages. And I actually was really excited when I stumbled upon the possibility of storing static voltages. So, like 1 volt, and it's just 1 volt, it doesn't fluctuate, or 2.37 volts. It just stores these things that you've decided, and then it's in a bank. So I can have up to 8, because you see 8 buttons here. I can have up to 8 static voltages in a preset, if you will. Um, and then I press the button and all those static voltages go out. And this makes, a lot of change in the patch depending on where I patch those voltages to. And that is a really quick way to make change in a patch. And so when I stumbled upon static voltages, that was huge for me. It's not a new concept. Everybody uses like these static voltages for various things. It's just an offset. It's just like the filter is here, but I'm sending this voltage, so now it opens up more.
Right.
It's simple concept, but to use them to actually go to new directions is something I was really interested in. And then in a case of like this, I get to choose 8 different ones. So basically I can have up to 8 different sections in a piece. That's one way of looking at it anyway. And now I can use another bank and have 8 more. There's a bunch of banks here. I think maybe 8 banks total. So I could have 64 different sections in a song if I really wanted. Um, anyway, so that's the main point of this one, is to help me get to places. And there's a few other helpers along the way, like the fact that Renee can store different types of sequences and things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't actually use any sequencers, but in this case I am.
So
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. The banks of static voltages, what is that module?
This is Livestock Electronics, Ellis.
Okay.
There's a few versions of these are kind of considered preset modules,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a way to kind of get presets out of your modular to a certain degree, because you are sending these voltages to different places. So in a way, you're at the press of a button going to a new sound or a new place. So it's kind of like a preset.
Right. It sounds a lot like the preset object in Max MSP. That's like my main frame of reference for this kind of stuff. But it does the same thing. You
Cool.
have a bunch of buttons, and whenever you hit the button, it will like jump to a stored state.
Yeah, exactly. That makes
Cool.
sense totally. What I love about this one is the fact that it has like the built-in slew, if you will, like where it will take a certain amount of time, and
Mm-hmm.
you can control that via CV. And that's why you may or may not have seen, depending on the cables being in the way or not, you might have seen the number just constantly in flux during the performance, which is probably coming from, let's take a quick look where that is coming from. Hold on one second. Okay, there it is. It is coming from the woggle bug. So the woggle bug is sending a random fluctuation to that,
Cool.
which is actually based on pitch, because the pitch is actually also going into the woggle bug. And this kind of feedback system is very interesting to me, like building up a lot of different feedback systems in a patch. So turning one knob, you may only see me do like, but that changes like, pitch, rhythm, uh, frequency modulation, cross frequency modulation, all kinds of things.
Wow. That's really cool. Right. So you're making these like decisions and maneuvers that are going to change so much more than you can possibly predict.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's part of the improvisatory moment, or improvisatory aspect.
Cool. Um, I wanted to ask, so in this particular performance, the Woggle bug is randomizing the amount of time that it takes to make a transition, but you are selecting when the transitions happen. Is that right?
Exactly.
Cool. So have you ever done a piece where you allow the preset module to, where you like randomize actually going to the different sections?
Yeah, it's hard to pull off because what I find is I'm very inspired by sound. And so when I'm creating with this fixed system here, where I can't just, like in software, I can just like, I need one more thing, I'll just duplicate that one more thing. With a modular synth, I cannot even do that at all.
Mm.
So a lot of the times I'm kind of working by adding material and creating material, and then I get some kind of sound I like, and then I'm like, okay, how do I get from point A to point B now? And I'll build up a point B. Sometimes by the time I've built up a few sections in a piece, I'm just out of modules and I can't find a way. Sometimes I can get really creative and I can find a way, but sometimes I just can't solve getting the synth to make some decisions. I just ran out of modules.
Right.
Yeah. And or even when I don't, sometimes the results are just too terrible. Yeah. But that's where I want to get to, though, more and more of that. That's sort of the journey I'm on, is getting to where uh more and more of the decisions come from the synth, and I can decide, the synth can decide, stuff like that.
Cool.
And one of the modules that are really important to that is this newer one I have called Compare To. It's really hard to see due to the cables, but it's a Jor analog module, and it's Compare To. And I actually have some examples in BCV Rack later that can help with talking about this, but it compares voltages. I like to do something where I have successfully made patches where the synth has decided when to do what. Um, in the studio, like when just recording and working with really small systems. And I have used this module for what it will be doing basically is it will be receiving the pitch CV or something like that, the notes, and it'll be like it'll have a threshold, and when a certain amount of notes that are high enough, high pitched enough, hit this thing, it will let out a gate, and that gate will trigger a big event to happen, like the next preset in the Ellis. And that's pretty cool.
Mm.
Yeah.
That seems like a nice compromise where um, you aren't deciding when to proceed to the next section, but there's still the kind of level of reliability that like it's being controlled by like a rule, and also the fact that like it will go in order, so that you get a nice balance between like unpredictability but also sort of a reliably good structure or something like that.
Yeah, except for I can actually tell Ellis when it gets that gate to make a random decision, which is pretty
Oh.
cool as well. It's pretty capable, although it's a little annoying. It's not the most easy to use module. It's not well designed. No
Mm-hmm.
offense, Livestock Ellis, but there are some Livestock Electronics, but there are some improvements this module could have for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. So what should we do next? Is there more overview of this patch that we want to talk about?
Just a couple of the micro generative things. Shout out to Qt Lab NYC here in NYC. I don't know if that's their full name, but Qt Lab makes this is their only module. But this is where a lot of the drums are coming from, because I don't like actually sequencing drums with like a normal gate sequencer or trigger sequencer. And so like I usually find gates in weird places or trigger patterns in weird places in the patch. But sometimes those things are like rapid fire, like a hi-hat just going crazy the entire time. But what this module does is it takes something like that really ridiculous trigger signal that I've got from somewhere, and it reduces based on a random algorithm that basically subtracts gates, and I can control that density with CV.
Hmm.
And so it's a great way to take really wild patterns from the synth that are being generated somewhere, maybe even by accident, and then get a drum pattern out of it that makes sense instead of chaos. Yeah.
Very
And
cool.
so that's one of the examples of micro I guess you could say, micro generative processes happening. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I guess one other thing I should point out is how I'm using the maths here is really interesting, I think. Like I'm actually, you see that there is a trigger going in here, but it's actually coming from, I'm actually triggering it most of the time via its cycle input. So it's actually, there's gates coming from the Rene that's telling it how long to cycle. And it's a lot to go into, but basically there's a very complex web of control signals that are being passed around here. So like I said before, if I turn this knob to make this fall time a little bit longer, it actually affects like at least 6 modules probably. And the other one's timing and vice versa. And that's really interesting, but it might be too much to really go into here, but yeah.
Wow. Well, so maybe like a slightly larger scale question for you then, while you're performing, and you go to like make a move by hand, turn a knob or something.
Mhm.
How many, what exactly is this question? Like how many types of things might you do? That's a weird way to ask that question.
No,
Like,
I kind of get that already.
go
Yeah, you're talking
ahead.
about like macro. Uh, this might get confusing because we've used micro and macro for another purpose, but you're talking about like in Ableton, how you can have the macro controls. Like how many controls am I letting myself play with? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Because in the end, if I change too many things, I'm probably gonna lose control, and also the Ellis will become more meaningless because if I turn a lot of things that's plugged into the preset module, I'm gonna get really crazy results when I hit this button, right? Because I've changed too many things. So yeah,
Mhm.
usually I've through some practice, I've learned what I'm going to control, and sometimes I even write it down. Like I'm allowed to touch these 8 knobs, or
Right.
I'm allowed to, yeah. But a lot of times, my goal is really to not actually have those restrictions, although I might tend towards certain places in a performance. And I was only touching a few knobs in that performance, but actually I feel pretty comfortable in the system, and um, I can kind of even change the oscillators, and I'm okay with it in this patch,
Hmm.
which is kind of something people don't generally do. They get their oscillators in tune and then they kind of leave it. Well, these actually aren't even in tune right now. So there's a lot of freedom in this patch.
Cool.
Yeah.
We actually have a question from Kirill. He is saying, could you tell us about some of the other rhythm generators in the patch?
Okay.
And he's asking if there is something acting as a master clock.
Okay. So master clock first. Let me think about it. There is, yes. So the master clock is basically Tempi. And
Make noise tempi.
yeah, make noise Tempi. And what's happening is, do you see this? It's kind of hard to see, but the sum out of the make noise Tempi is going, sorry, the sum out of the make noise maths module is going into Tempi's CV input, and it's controlling the tempo. And so Tempi, short answer is Tempi is the lead clock, but the master clock. But the I'm actually CVing it from the pitch of oscillate of Rene channel 2. So it's in flux.
Hmm.
And if I and based on where I go, based on that pitch information, the tempo changes as well, which is pretty fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
So then
Oh,
other
other
rhythmic things in the patch.
other rhythmic things. So let's see. The kick, the kick's tempo is coming. The kick's triggers are coming from. Let me take a close look. I'm gonna get in the camera for a second. It's actually a logic module situation. So I'm comparing some signals coming from the pitch CV of Rene of um, the Y channel of actually, sorry, that's wrong. This is a hard question, but basically, I'm taking a marbles clock, and I'm taking a what is this guy up here? I'm taking and I'm taking the main Tempi clock, and I'm comparing them, or I'm using this logic function called and it's basically saying when those two clocks line up, and only when those two clocks line up, will a kick trigger come out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's actually doing it quite often enough that I'm also sending that into the Qt Lab missed opportunities module, which is that one I mentioned earlier, where it actually like subtracts some of the voltage.
Mhm.
So this is it's actually missing some of those and functions, if you will, which I think is pretty cool. And last step is I actually switch between where that clock is coming from sometimes based on the switch up here. So that's a lot to get into if I go all the way into there, but that's the essence. It's not only getting generated in a really weird way, but it also has a few options.
Cool. Awesome.
I hope that answers it relatively well.
Yeah, for sure. We have one more question specific to the modules, and then maybe we can hop over to VCV.
Cool.
So Kate, hi Kate. Kate is asking how marbles and scales are being used.
Scales is quite simple at this moment. Basically, its pitch CV is coming from somewhere, but basically scales is controlling the mangrove, which I only use for the bass line in a few sections. You may have heard it come in. So that's a pretty simple use case of scales. For marbles, I'm using marbles a little weird here. I'm clocking both sides independently from other sources in the patch. And I'm actually not using it as a random note generator, which is weird because I almost always do. I'm actually using it as an analog shift register on one side, and then the other side is just sort of a coin toss random trigger. So that side is kind of normal in a way. The left side, I'm using it very random wise. But on the right side, I'm actually taking CV from Renee and using it as an analog shift register. You may be able to see this green light on right here. That's the door. There's like this picture of a door, and then it's lit up above with this green light. That's saying that signal is actually coming in. And I'm basically just using it as an analog shift register. So every time it receives a clock, it just passes that voltage on to the next output and the next output.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see. So we have a couple more questions, if you don't mind sticking with this.
No, it's fine.
Is asking what envelopes you're using and what they are doing.
Cool. The easiest one is this Contour is the hi-hat envelope. The Contour by Make Noise. And it's the O control, which I'm not using, so I can actually show you. Oh, sorry, not O control. The O coast, zero coast. It has a Contour envelope generator. It's called Contour, and this module is actually the same circuit pretty much in Eurorack form.
Cool.
Although this is semi-modular and Eurorack compatible. But anyway, so it's actually a slew generator lag processor. But anyway, I'm just using it as an envelope, and occasionally it receives random control from the Wogglebug to make the hi-hat open and close, which is kind of nice. The mass are the other envelopes, and the only ones, and besides the Contour. And what I said before, it's doing some complex stuff. And I should mention, since you asked, like the mass module here was inspired by, I actually made a note of this, the double knot, which is this small desktop synth that is like banana cable. And it has this dual digital shift register in it, which I find really fascinating, but it's really hard to find in Eurorack. Actually, I don't know if one exists that's like a pure digital shift register. And so this patch is inspired by the double knot. I just watched all these videos on the double knot and was like, wow, the way you can get these amazing rhythms. And so I've tried to recreate that in the maths.
Awesome. Next question comes from actually my mom. Hi, Mom. Thanks for being here. And she is she says that it's a really beautiful instrument, and I completely agree. And it's kind of asking about the aesthetics of how you're patching. So are you thinking about kind of like where the cables are falling and kind of like color coding the cables to help get yourself around the synth and things like that?
I usually start a little bit with color coding to a certain degree because it can help at the very beginning. So like a good example of this is, I think it's still there. You can see this orange cable coming out of the sine wave oscillator B of the DPO here. So this is just carrying the sine wave and it goes into the Optimix, and you'll notice this other orange cable is going into the Optimix as well, and that's actually the maths envelope. So that channel is like the orange channel for me, or that's that oscillator. But in the end, I always run out of the color, so I have to give up on that pretty quick. But I do color code in the beginning a little bit, and then I just lose it. And actually, I ran out of patch cables when I made this patch, and so I had to go to Control yesterday and buy some more. Luckily, I live really close to Control, and I bought a few more to finish this work.
That's lucky to live so close to that store.
Yeah.
Great store. Cool. Well, that's really interesting. Yeah.
The way they fall and everything I don't consider that too much. I try to get them a little out of the way, but in the end, I do know. I mean, I love the way it looks. Sometimes I just look at my synth and I'm like, I should turn it on, I guess.
Nice. Okay. One more question again from Kate. Hi, Kate. Again. How is beads being used to process sound, and what is it processing?
Let's see. Beads is processing everything that is not drums. So, and not the bass. So beads is processing the DPO voices and the rings, which by the way, what's going into rings is the DPO voices again. So it's like another version of the same voice. So you can see I'm actually using its input here as a so anyway, so beads is processing all of that, and I'm mostly just using it as just like this textural voice that kind of comes in. I can kind of bring it back real quick, and I think you'll hear it pretty quick. Let's see. Those little like kind of voices that come up sometimes, that's the beads. And in this section, it might take a moment to get there because it's going to decide for me, but let's give it a second. It's on its way. It's trying to make it up here. All right, this is exclusively beads, wet signal. And it's occasionally being frozen. This section was inspired by like early academic electronic stuff, and you can probably hear that if you've listened to. So yeah, that's all beads there. So sometimes beads plays like a not so important role, I guess, and other times it's really what we're hearing.
Oh, that's really cool. I like that. Awesome. Well, Matthew, I would love, I know one of the things you're planning to do is show kind of more of like how you think about this stuff in VCV. Right? Does that sound good? Or is there anything else you want to talk about while we're looking at your synth?
Let's see. I think that's good. I think that's
Cool.
good. I'm going to switch cameras and everything. I'll be back. All right. Behind the scenes real quick, I'm going to quit Ableton. Don't want my computer to get like too bogged down.
Sure. Take your time.
Almost there. Okay, cool. All right. Do you see VCV rack here?
Yes, looks great.
Awesome. So, you know what? This is the wrong one though. Sorry. Gonna open another one. Compare and count. Okay. So this is an example of taking something very simple. I tried to create a simple patch, but sometimes it's a little difficult to get enough, but to work with. But basically, I have just this Platts oscillator that is the only voice that you hear. And what's going to happen is a relatively large change is going to occur at a certain point, and I'm pulling that off by using similar to the Jor analog module I mentioned earlier. This compare module is receiving pitch from whoever asked about marbles earlier might like this. It's receiving its pitch from marbles from this X. You can kind of see here. Uh-oh. Okay. From this X output here, X2.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt. I
Sure.
don't know what marbles does.
Oh, marbles. Okay, as you can see, it's like random sampler, but it's a Turing machine, and
Okay.
it's like, do you know much about like Turing machine
Maybe
modules and stuff?
a quick definition would help.
The basic thing is, if the most simple way to explain it, I think, is just a Turing machine based module is basically a module that produces random voltages, but instead of just continuously being random, you can actually lock it and it repeats back the same thing based on the length. And what's really amazing about the Turing machine module, originally made by Music Thing Modular, I want to say, is you can turn the knob one direction and it actually starts to loosen up that lock and let in some new random voltage, which is amazing because your piece can slowly change or quickly change. You can unlock it. And what the Marbles does a lot of different things. It really kind of builds off of that, the Marbles module that we're looking at here in VCV Rack. What this module does is it actually allows you to do just that, where you go to the left with this deja vu knob and it allows more random voltage in. But if you go to the right, very interestingly, it stays locked, but it randomizes the voltage. So no, that's a bad way of saying it. It creates variations on the locked voltage. So instead of just getting like, let's say, a 3-note pattern of C, D, E over and over again, sometimes it's C, E, D or C, D, D and stuff like that. And how much you turn it is how much variation you get.
If it's center, is it totally fixed?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's really cool. I love that.
And Mutable Instruments design such great things like for performance. So like it also has a virtual notch in the middle. So if you don't get it just right, it's still locked. And in the real module, it flashes when it's locked. In this VCV rack, you don't really know for sure, but you can hear.
Awesome.
Yeah. So there is some random locked, but with a little bit of variation, as you can see, because it's tilted towards the right. There is some random voltage coming out of Marbles, and it's going into this compare signal. And this compare has just static voltage here that it's comparing it to. And so this is like a threshold, and it's saying if the pitches go higher than this threshold, it's going to send out a gate. Okay. And every time you see this little flashing light right here that my mouse is kind of circling, every time you see that, it makes this counter count up. This is a very max MSP kind of thing, you know, using counters. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of hard to find counters in an actual Eurorack synth, but you can use clock dividers for the same thing, mostly. It depends on your clock divider. But anyway, once it counts to 10, it's not on right now, but once it counts to 10, it will trigger the next event. And that's the essence of what this patch is. It's getting random volts. If they cross a threshold, the counter goes up. And when the counter reaches 10, it triggers big change. And that big change is coming from this SEQ or sequence 3 module by VCV. And how does it...
One second. Do you mind just zooming in a little bit on kind of the main part of the patch? Couple comments.
Sure. Let me see if I can... Oh yeah, I think I just have to do this. Yeah.
And folks in the audience, you can also full screen the window if you don't already have that.
Yeah. So there's that random voltage again from Marbles. Just VCV Rack, a lot of companies don't actually make these, or they do. Like, you may not always have the correct name on the module is what I'm trying to say. So it just calls it random sampler here and not marbles. So if you're looking for the name marbles, you will not see it, but this is it. Anyway, I should say that the change, I said that once this compare module, once this counter module reaches 10, it triggers change. That change happens because, once again, I'm using static voltage. And the static voltage is from the sequencer, and it's just going to stage 2, and all these little knobs you see turn slightly, they're just plugged into various places in the patch to create the change. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, so you're using the sequencer like the preset device in your actual synth.
100%. And I mean, really, you could say the preset device is a sequencer. It's just a digital one where you don't see all the knobs.
Right.
Yeah. But would you like to hear?
Yes.
All right. So I'm gonna unmute it, and then I'm going to start the counter. So you get the idea. It's a very simple example, but yeah, the changes, if you just really quickly look at where these CV outputs from the sequencer are going, they're just doing things like changing the model on the plats. They're just doing things like, I think, making this digital delay go fully wet. So we're only hearing that. I use effects a lot like this, like making them using these offset voltages, just making an effect go fully wet and stuff like that. It's a good way to have a quick and easy different section. But that's it overall.
Cool. Yeah, that's a really great demonstration. I like that.
Cool. I think that's the most important thing. Should I move on to the other example that's a little bit more fleshed out, or are there any questions about this?
Yeah, anybody have questions about this patch?
It's not the most beautiful patch. I just wanted to make something that hopefully demonstrated how you create change.
Right. Well, I think this was really helpful in understanding how you would structure a piece that has such distinct sections in it. And also, I love this idea of, it's just like, feels like a different way of using a sequencer. Instead of like generating melodies or something like that, the sequencer is it's generating these like long, like larger scale changes. Really cool.
Yeah, and what's at play here is really micro and macro generative processes, because the micro, in a very simple way, is just the pitch. And I'm not in this case allowing new random volts in. I'm just creating variations on a locked voltage like we talked about. But I still don't know when it's going to hit the high notes enough that it crosses the compare threshold, which makes the counter count. So it's going to happen at some point, but it's going to take either more or less time to trigger that next section.
Right. And then if you grabbed the deja vu knob and sort of cranked it left and then threw it back to where it is now, that would load the marbles with a new melody, right?
Exactly. And I'll do that. But also, I can also just unlock it by pressing whichever side I want. This is the CV or pitch side, and this is the gate or time size side. So yeah, I'll just do that really quick. And now it's locked again. And now though, we're not crossing the threshold at all. So this would just stay still. But that's okay, because I could just set up other situations where I CV'd the threshold amount. And so I could be like, hey, this section doesn't have any high pitches, but the threshold changes. So now I can still cross it in some other way. Yeah.
Right. But, I like this idea too, because like, I like the idea that it can kind of get stuck in different places, because I feel like if you have this patch that's like making these large scale decisions of switching from one section to another, but the pacing, like if you start to notice like, okay, that happens roughly every like 30 seconds or so, then it's like, okay, the patch isn't really thinking that hard. But the idea that it can unpredictably get stuck somewhere makes this really like unusually proportioned structure where you like, I don't know, get stuck somewhere, and then suddenly maybe you're back in that sort of range of like changing every 30 seconds or something like that. That's a really exciting way for the patch to kind of surprise you.
Yeah. And you can also, like, that's if you don't want your piece to be fully generative, well, that's an opportunity for you to get in there and make some changes in real time.
Right.
Because you're like, oh man, this is never going to change. I want to do something.
Cool.
Yeah. Should I open up the other one?
Yeah, let's see it.
All right. So this one is a little bit more fleshed out, but it's still overall simple. And I'll actually play it maybe first this time instead of explaining.
Cool.
Because the essence is actually exactly the same. If you look around, you'll see it's a little different order, but you'll see the compare and the count, and you'll see marbles at play again. And it's the same thing to do with pitch, making the change. I like working with pitch to make changes, but not always. I'll also just count drum hits or something sometimes. Anyway, here we go. With both of these examples, I just did 2 sections, to keep it simple.
That was really beautiful. I like that one.
Thank you. And this one has great examples of small change as well as big, or small generative processes and large. A quick example is like you can see this ADSR. I'll zoom in on it. You can see this. The decay is changing. Let's see, now it's going to stay in place, but it does change from time to time. There it goes a little bit. That's the hi-hat opening and closing, one of my favorite things to do. Very simple. There's a bunch of small changes happening. The lengths of notes, of course the melody itself. Now let's find marbles. There it is. The melody itself is actually unlocked. Well, it's locked with new voltages being let in very slow. So it's not the same as before in the previous example. And then of course we have the large change from the same kind of situation here occur. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's really great. Let's see. So I have a question. When you build a patch like this, where the macro level changes are happening with a sequencer or something like that, I know we've talked about different ways of doing this. So in the patch you performed earlier, you would change them, and then in this patch, it's the compare and the counter changing them once you pass a certain threshold. I'm wondering, when you use like a bank of presets to build a structure like this, do you usually go in order like that, or do you ever do other things?
No, I have 2 things. I've done in smaller patches where I don't run out of modules. I mostly work with hardware, so I always am gonna. The easiest answer is to pull from that hardware examples. So I usually sometimes I will have like Ellis, for instance, choose a random place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, sometimes I don't only use Ellis, actually, the livestock, the module we've been talking about a lot. Sometimes I don't actually use only that. I'll also be using another sequencer or something to hold voltage. And so they're both going in random places. And that's really fun.
Mm.
Yeah. And then some of that slewed, taking time to get there, and other ones aren't. So that's really fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Awesome. I'm wondering what other, I'm just trying to sort of like brainstorm other ways of like jumping around the sections. Like I wonder if you ever do something where it like sort of gets halfway through and then starts over, or like, I don't know, different ways of randomizing besides just like a fully random choice.
Yeah. Well, another example, this may not answer the question, but one thing I wanted to mention is there's modules like this draw analog one I have in my synth that can actually create a window. Instead of just a threshold, it can create a window. It's called a window comparator. And when voltages are in that little window, you're passing out gates. Okay, so then you can count them from there. Or what I really love is you can compare two voltages. So I do that a lot. I'll just go back to pitch as an example again. But you have two pitches, two oscillators are receiving pitch CV from something, and but it's also going into the compare two module, like two different things being looked at, and when they both collide or are in the same window, it sends out a voltage. Or when they're not in the same window, it sends out a voltage. And that's also really cool ways to work. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be pitch CV. It could be slow LFOs. It could be two drum hits that very, very rarely hit together, but when they do, it triggers a new event. There's a lot of different things you can use to trigger new events.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
And of course, the things that trigger the new events are the essence of all those things are very generative in nature. So you're going to some zone with some rules. You're going to a new section with some rules you've prepared in advance, but you're not really for sure how it's going to sound overall. You can get really wild results.
Right.
Yeah, because you do have that micro and macro generative processes at play, which is really, I love it when I get that right. Like when I'm like, whoa, every time it goes to a new section or something,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Fantastic. What's next? What should we do next?
Well, I wanted to show an example. I primarily work like in 3 different ways.
Actually, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Matt.
that's okay.
Just because we have a question now specific to this patch. So before we jump,
let's do it.
Kirill is asking what the 3 Bernoulli gates are doing in this.
It's very similar to the way I was using the Qt Lab missed opportunities module in the actual modular synth. It's basically just receiving triggers. In this case, actually all from marbles. And actually marbles kind of can already do this a little bit, but anyway, it's taking those triggers from marbles. Each Bernoulli gate is taking a different trigger, and it's just a Bernoulli gate is basically just saying go out this side or go out this other side. So out A, out B. It makes a choice, and it's a random choice. And this module at the top determines if it's like 100% out of the left side, which is not really a choice anymore. As you can see, both of these flashes, I'll zoom in a little more. Both of these flashes are happening simultaneously. It never misses one. But as soon as I go all the way to the other side, it's 100% out of this side. So you don't see a flash right here anymore lining up. These 2 flashes. Well, actually, this one's just never flashing. And if I go here, it's 50-50. It could come out of this side or this side. So it's a way, once again, to reduce trigger chaos. Too many triggers at one time.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, there's a kick one, a snare one, and a hi-hat one. I think I'm using it for all the drums.
Nice.
And it does have 2 channels, but I think that I just ended up using 3 Bernoulli gates for whatever reason.
Sure. I guess that's the nice thing about VCV rack. You don't have to be too
Yeah.
economic.
I think I had intentions of doing a lot more with them, but I just didn't get around to it. Yeah.
Sure. And well, that's great. So the last question we have related to this is Greg asking if you're willing to share these patches. I think that.
Oh yeah, sure, definitely. Cool. I have to learn how to do it, but I'm sure it's not hard.
Okay, cool. So, well, I guess just context in case anyone here isn't familiar with VCV Rack. This is free software, free, virtual modular synthesizer. So, Matthew, am I understanding correctly that all of the modules you're using are included in the free version?
They're all free, but you have to add them to your library, which you do on VCV's website. And it's very simple. You just look up a module and press add. And then when you open VCV Rack, it'll let you know that you have you need to close it again and reopen it because it will update with the new module. So you might go to open my shared patch and not be able to at first, or maybe it'll tell you you need these things, these modules, and then you just quickly add them and then it will be okay.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
So that means that VCV Rack is a really good way into modular synthesis if you don't have a hardware synthesizer. So
totally.
In the audience, awesome. You should definitely try this out if you haven't already. And Matthew, maybe we can figure out like a Google Drive situation with these patches or something like that. And once we do that, I'll put it on the Algorithmic Sound link tree so people can, go check out those patches. So keep an eye on that link tree if you want to grab those in the next few days.
Sure. Sounds really good.
Thanks, Matthew. Cool. So feel free to hop to the next section then.
Cool. I'm just going to close VCV Rack here. And I wanted to show you that I basically work a lot in 3 different ways, primarily. Like I do mostly work with hardware, and it's only hardware, and I come up with everything there. But sometimes I also do like hybrid systems, which have an advantage. You can do a lot of unique things that way. And I also do sometimes fully software, doing just like Max MSP stuff, but that's still a pretty new world to me. And I'm just getting, I haven't really produced results that I really love yet, but I'll get there, I think. And that's something I'm really excited about, because working with Max MSP allows me to really, it just lends itself to complex generative pieces. I don't have to worry about how many modules I have. But anyway, this is an example from Voltage Scores, which is my new album that came out in October on Oxtail Recordings. And what I like about Voltage Scores is it uses all those examples, all the ways of working, except for Max MSP. So I did hybrid stuff, and I did exclusively hardware music. And this is an example of a hybrid piece. And all these red lines you see, if I click one of these tracks, double click it, you can see that it's a CV utility. Once again, static voltages, and they're coming out. These static voltages are each coming out of a channel on an expert sleepers module, which you may or may not know much about, but the expert sleepers modules are a great way to interface with software, and it can just send that signal out to my Eurorack at the Eurorack standard, and it works well. And these signals are nothing more than offsets, again, static voltages. And this is a great way I created sections. So this isn't really so generative in the fact that it's saying like, all right, go here now, and exactly at this moment, whatever, 29 seconds in the piece or whatever. But because there's so much micro stuff happening, when these things change, I get very different results, or relatively different results. And this is where the name Voltage Scores came from, because I was looking at all these red lines and I was like, looks like a voltage score. And that's where it came from. But because basically I'm looking at this while I'm making it, which is kind of a wild thing perhaps to look at. But and then I just record different takes, and sometimes it's a bunch of tracks, and sometimes it's just 2, because I actually don't always multi-track, because the way that the stuff comes out of the modular, sometimes it's just a few signals and sometimes it's a lot. And so you can see all these different takes.
That's so cool. So the voltage score, the red lines that kind of dictate certain parameters, preset parameters, those are always the same for each take, but just the nature of the patch itself means that every version is a little different.
Exactly. And if, while recording and listening, because this is usually, these pieces are very hands off, unless I need to make some kind of change and I just ran out of stuff again and I need to become like a module myself. Like at this moment I do this and then I do this. Sometimes I need to do that, but most of these pieces end up me very much hands off and I just press play and listen. If I notice something is like not so great, I might reduce one of the voltages or shift it or something and then do another take. So sometimes my takes are a little, the voltage score changes subtly in between takes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I actually, sorry, I have to go grab a package. I'll be right back, but
okay.
please continue. Thanks.
This is actually a track called hold on, what track is this? This is Thoughts All Jitter. So if you listen to Thoughts All Jitter on voltage scores, this is what it looks like. And the take that I used was take 3, which I thought was the best take. But I'm really interested in not always having one track being the official track. And I guess whatever comes out first is and recognizes the official version. But I like this idea of always listing the take number, not really to say so much really that this is the best one or the worst one, but this is just that take number. And then in a future release, you might see another take number. And it's a way to kind of communicate its generative nature, its improvisatory nature, but still in a recorded document form, if that makes sense. Since Jacob is out, I'll play a couple examples of this track from the album and then compare it maybe to another one, just a little bit. Let's see, is this still zoom? Hopefully this comes through. So that's that piece, and you can listen to it in full on voltage scores. But a brief example, I mean, this may not sound crazy different, but let's just take 1 for instance and pick another section. So here's the beginning of take 1. So you might hear like there's some similar zones, if you will, but like the results were quite different. If you were to play that, if you were thinking like a guitarist improvising, they definitely play different notes on those 2 takes, and different rhythms.
That's awesome. What kinds of things did you think about when you were choosing which take to release?
Purely like aesthetic, just like what I liked. Yeah. But I was mentioning while you were out that
Sorry.
no, it's okay. Had to get that package. But the basically like I did pick like the one I like the most because it's the first one I'm presenting out there. But in the end, like I'm more interested in sharing multiple takes over time because it allows me to kind of communicate its generative and improvisatory nature in a recorded form. I think like, Brian Eno talked a little bit about how he lamented the fact that producing like generative work and then recording it and then sending it out, you can't tell it's generative, right? Because there's this one thing that plays the same from beginning to end. But if you put a take number on it, perhaps you're sort of hinting at the fact that there's all these other versions, whether it's improvisatory or generative. And if you actually start to release those versions, then it becomes even more clear. And so I kind of like this idea, instead of this track is called Thoughts All a Jitter, instead of just saying Thoughts All a Jitter. And that's the first version. The next one is called like remix whatever, and the next version is called alt version whatever. It just is take 1, take 4, take 6. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's sort of like the recorded version sort of has like a aura of like less stability or less like finality.
Yeah. And you know, maybe the world of like there's a lot of negative stuff about like NFTs and everything for sure. But if we can kind of get to a place where it's actually really beneficial to artists and not corporations as much, and it's not so terrible on the environment and everything, like if we could make more, there are some positives about it, and one of those could be the fact that maybe you can actually get to a point, I don't know what the music version of it is yet, but maybe we could get to a point where actually we're sharing generative work that's actually changing in real time while you're listening to it. Maybe that's going to allow us to do that. This some new paths that are opening up. I mean, you can already do that if you build an app. Brian Eno has built apps, right, and stuff, or has worked with people who have done that. But I mean, like, wouldn't it be cool if you open up something similar to Spotify or Apple Music, and the music's generative, or some close relative of that?
Right.
Anyway, well, yeah.
I'm wondering, have you considered any different strategies for multiple takes? Like if you have 10 takes of this, have you thought about like putting an album out that's a bunch of takes of the same thing, or like pressing different iterations to vinyl or something like that, and you don't know which one you buy it?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm planning on doing a release where it's like 100 different versions of the same track, or sorry, 100 different versions of the album, and like it's all different takes, and but it's hard to do that with modular. But it might be a more like Max MSP version, because recording 100 different modular takes sounds very nauseating, but it could happen, or maybe it doesn't have to be such a high number, but I like the idea of it's also limited, like if it's in a physical form there's only one of that, but that may be very difficult financially, so I'm not for sure if I could nail that, but I've been thinking a lot about this. Cool. About having 100 different versions of something or something like that.
Yeah, I love that. A few questions. Greg is asking, can you just show us again which plugins you're using to send CV over to the synth?
Yeah, it's the free, if you have Ableton 10 or 11. Anything before that, I don't think you can use. But it's the Max for Live devices, and I'm just using the CV utility one, not too fancy. But if I go here to my plugins, if you go to like, I think the best way to look at it is actually in the packs section. You can see I have CV tools. So I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe you do download this, like, you know, through your get more packs section, like available packs. But it's just the CV tools. Cool. And yeah, it's just the standard stuff. So I'm just using CV utility, and it's not plugged in right now, so you can see this little thing is grayed out down here, but usually this will be expert sleepers, and it's a certain output coming out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And actually that leads us into our next question from Niles. Are you using the ES8, and do you ever use the ES8 or the ES9 or whichever one you have to record the audio from the synth?
Yeah. So, yep. Especially if the track is like kind of, if I decided to multi-track or whatever. I'm not doing so much of that. I'll get back to that. The ES8. So I'm using the ES3, 6, and 7. Mm-hmm. And since I don't think we have to look at Ableton anymore, I'll switch cameras to show you real quick.
Okay.
This, there we go. So here is the ES6, or sorry, ES3, which is taking it's taking stuff from Ableton or whatever, any software, and it's sending it out to the synth. So I guess it's an output module. And then ES6 and 7 are your input. And yes, I do directly record it. It's fine quality. I may not be like the most high definition ever, but it's totally good enough. And so yes, I do send stuff into here sometimes when I want to multi-track even and have even more channels. But my audio interface is a Motu Ultralight MK4, and it can send DC voltage. So not only do I have these 8 that can send out DC voltage, I have 8 more channels on my just normal interface. And this connects to that interface via the ADAT cables. And that's why I use it instead of an ES8, is that I can use my Motu interface for multi-tracking and sending voltages, and then add this on top of all those available channels. So I can basically send back and forth 16 different signals of some kind.
Wow.
Yeah, and multi-track that. And I have done that. But a lot of times I find that I don't love the results of having 16 different tracks. I actually like, or 8 different tracks. I actually like all my drums coming out of one filter, and that filter is like getting distorted and mangled and messed up. And I don't actually want those clean, independent drum tracks or melodies. I actually like just taking one big signal out of the synth, or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Like you saw in Ableton, there was only 2 stereo tracks.
Yeah, you know, I've had similar impulses recently. You know, I'm not really using very much modular gear, but just sort of like whenever I'm recording raw material to use in an album or something, I kind of like just having big stereo files and not having too many options in terms of mixing. And something nice about just like, all right, I have to paint with broad strokes. That's the only option I have. Feels kind of good.
Yeah, and also I have this Vortices mixer, which sounds very, it's an analog mixer in Eurorack form, and it's not a very traditional mixer. It's not like send, you don't have send and return channels. You don't have a lot of control like that, but it sounds really nice. It's really warm, and it's really it helps glue things together. And if I'm using that as well, I see even less reason to worry so much about having multi-tracked channels. But yeah, it's always pros and cons, you know. Sometimes it's nice to have multiple channels and do a lot of mixing work, really fine-tune the mix. But I don't know if the results are that much better in the end.
Yeah. Follow-up question on asking about like your hybrid setup when you're using the computer and the synth, and you know, the expert sleepers modules to get sounds in and out. Have you ever experimented with a hybrid setup where you're not just sending control signals out, but have you done something where like the synth sends a control signal into the computer and then something generative happens with that and it sends something back out?
Yeah, 100%. Well, sending it back out, not so much, even though it's definitely possible. The reason why I haven't is because I am I get a little frustrated by latency, and when you're sending things back and forth, a lot of times, as you probably noticed, some of my tempi are really fluctuate a lot. It's something that's really interesting to me. I don't really like steady beats, so I do have a lot of music that's steady, but not recently. And if stuff is going into the computer, doing something, and then coming back out, it's not always precise, and I can tell a lot of the times. So it's definitely possible, but I haven't done it as much. But I have recorded CV coming into Ableton, and it looks like audio. But then it's kind of tricky sometimes, but if you get the right CV tools, plugins just right, you can actually control things in Ableton that way. I've controlled my panning in Ableton with CV from the modular. I've controlled filters inside of Ableton via the modular, and I've even launched clips, which are then sending out some kind of offset voltage into the modular. So yeah, I've done what you're asking about, but not exactly, maybe, but something pretty similar.
Cool. So we are getting close to time. I wonder if there's any other things you wanted to get to.
I think I do have an example, but we don't have time for it, of like a piece that's fully generative and hardware on video. Maybe it's not so important. It's just a couple minutes. But
You want to do one more video? I think so.
Okay. So this one, this is pretty short. I may not even play all of it, but just an example of a piece that plays itself from beginning to end, and I can choose to do something if I want. I do have to tell it to start and stop. I've also done things where I don't have to tell it to stop, which is fun. But anyway, here's this piece. I'll jump ahead a little bit. That's basically the ending.
Awesome. That's super cool. I mean, it's really exciting to see all of these kind of different setups that you're using to find different ways of like building structures and having more or less control over those structures.
Yeah, I think I should mention that right now my work, we were talking about this in our meeting the other day, is kind of on this, my approach to work is kind of on the spectrum of being not necessarily fully improv. There's always generative stuff happening, at least on some scale, but it sort of exists on this like relatively low level generative stuff with a lot of improvisation, mostly improv. And an example of that is like the second track on my album, Metricity, is very improvised, and there's a few tracks that are just live. Oh well, all of them are live, if you know what I mean, but they're where it's just really improv, and very much so, even some real-time patching. And then there's the more extreme side, which is fully generative, and the work definitely fluctuates between those two. But I think in the end, my goal would be to like be able to improvise even those large scale macro generative things. And I would love to get to that point where like I walk up to a show and there's nothing patched on the synth, and the performance itself is the patching in real time, is the improvisation, and is the generative large scale stuff simultaneously. That may be like too much. Maybe I can't pull it off, but that's sort of the path I'm on at the moment, trying to achieve.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That, I mean, that feels kind of like a perfect summary of the things we talked about, and, you know, points to the future of where you're headed with this stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
It is 3:30, so I suppose we should wrap it up. Matthew, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing all this with us. It's exciting to see it. I feel inspired. I'm going to go write some music.
Awesome.
To the audience, thank you for showing up. Thanks for being here. Excellent questions. Yeah, so anyway, keep an eye out for the next one, and everybody have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.